Hello there, it's Maggie, Cheshire Crafter here. Now, I had intended to do some sewing. I've got my sewing machine set up in front of me, and I haven't used this sewing machine for 2 years. I needed to give it a real good dust down. I'm pleased to say that the electric works, the light works. What I can't find is the foot. Now, I found this. If anybody can tell me what this is and what it does. Can you see that? It's obviously a foot of some sort. I found my quilting foot and my embroidery foot. I just can't find the basic foot. So I'm scuppered, and it just means that I can't do the sewing that I wanted to. It's Saturday night now, and although I've been able to order a new foot on eBay, it's going to be midweek before it arrives. I've lost half the week, and I wanted to sew something in particular for the 4th of July, Independence Day. However, you know that saying, you win some, you lose some. So I can't use the sewing machine at the minute, but guess what else I found? I found from Christmas a 3/4 full tin of Quality Street, and it's still got my favourites in. So my favourites are the Turkish Delight, the coffee ice, the Brazil nut, the Nutella, the toffees, even the strawberry ones. The things that get left at the bottom are the orange creams and these orange crunch. And if anybody saw the new Channel 4 programme, I think last night, the quiz programme with Claudia Winkleman, when the question was what is square, and they had to identify what shape the orange crunch was in a tin of Quality Street, most people would have been screaming at the telly. We know, because it's an octagon, not a square. Anyway, be that as it may, the young men won money. Right, so instead of doing sewing, I'm going to tell you about what I've been doing today. And I've been over to the Northwich Carnival. Now, it hasn't been held because of the pandemic. It hasn't been held for a couple of years. And I think that the Carnival Queen that was selected a few years ago was actually crowned today. We made our way there, had to get out the wheelchair, walk up the hill. It's quite a steep slope as well. Walk up the hill while my carer pushed the wheelchair. And we got to the top, paid our money to get in, and I got one of these, brochures. And I said, what time's the crowning of the Queen on? And they said, oh, retinue, about 2:30. Not specific to timing, but about 2:30. So they took our money and we went straight to where the Queen's and the retinue was, and we'd missed it. And I'd said, is that it? Have we missed it already? It was only about 1:45. They'd finished by 2:00. They said, the Queen and her retinue are now going to retire, and they're going to go to the Jubilee tent with the Mayor and the Lady Mayoress, and they're going to have afternoon tea. I went, oh, okay, bye then. Nice seeing you. It was, we were too late. And I commented, and somebody behind me said, have we just missed it as well? I said, yeah, they might have said that before they took our money. I was really disappointed. We stayed for the falconry display, and it got to a point where we started giggling because the falcon disappeared into the trees, and the guy said, well, I can find where it is on SatNav. Well, that's not very good. The audio didn't work very well. We'd missed the crowning. We didn't see any of the hoo-ha that the retinue do with the Queens. And I thought, well, in its heyday, this was very, very different. So I'm going to talk to you about the time that the Beatles crowned the Northwich Carnival Queen, and that was 1963, and it was the 6th of July 1963. Now, the carnival tradition has still been upheld then, so even though it wasn't very good, frankly, and there wasn't much of a fair there today, I think the families must have been quite disappointed, like we were. Having said that, given the fact there's been a pandemic, given the fact that committee have just come back together, they've cobbled something together and done the best that they can. So well done for trying it. And I think next year will probably be better. Having said that, though, they weren't able to have a parade through the town because the police would charge them £2,000 for security and the police presence, or closing off the streets. And they've altered the streets in Northwich over the years to a one-way system, and they weren't prepared to pay that price for it, which is a great shame. Now, in its heyday, all the carnivals around, they started with the tradition of a May Day festival in Knutsford, which is central Cheshire. Sorry, I'm rubbing my eyes here. In central Cheshire. And then from May Day onwards, all the towns around would have a fair. And then starting in Northwich, they would have a carnival to crown the queens, and all the villages from around about would present themselves at Northwich Carnival. And then there would be a village a week, or perhaps two on a Saturday, would be crowned and have their village fete. And the fair, which is the electrical, it used to be run by gypsies, didn't it? But the electrical fair travelled from place to place. And so you'd have the carnival, you'd have the Rose Fete, which is the traditional crowning of a rose queen, and her retinue is all her attendees. And you would have entertainment and a fair as well. Now, in my youth, what happened, you would have a parade through the town. Quite often they'd start off at a church and have a blessing ceremony. And the parades consisted of bands, brass bands, jazz bands, bands with kazoos, marionettes throwing up there. What were those poles that they had to throw up and catch again? My memory, though, is of the Morris dancers, and by that I mean the Morris dancers who wore short skirts, usually women, short skirts, and they were dancing troops, and they walked through the streets, and sometimes it would be a mile and a half through the streets, and they wore pumps with little bells on their feet, and they walked on tiptoes through the streets, and they were I'm slapping my thighs now, because they'd do this. They'd slap their thighs as they went through the streets. Well, for weeks afterwards, I made up the little pom-poms that they shook and slapped my thighs. I was really sore after a few weeks. But they competed. After all the Rose Fete had gone on, they then started having the competitions, and they would come from all over the northwest in their coaches for the competitions. And the competition would go on till about 7 o'clock at night, until they announced the winners. And the winners would get a trophy, and the leaders would get little badges. And they were like prefect badges that we wore in school, but they very proudly pinned them onto their waistcoats, which were often made of something like velvet, quite sumptuous material. And you could tell which dance troupes were the best, because the leaders were absolutely covered in their badges as they came through the streets. So there was always music. They always collected for local charities. You always had the British Legion with the flags. You'd have the Scout Troop, the Cubs, the Girl Guides, the what was the little Girl Guides called? The Brownies. You'd have the pubs. They'd put on big displays on floats, carnival floats now. So it certainly isn't what it was. Now, back in 1963, the reason why that is significant is because the Beatles were there, and the Beatles were there to play in the Memorial Hall for a concert in the evening, and it was the 5th out of 6 times that they did a concert in the Memorial Hall in Northwich, and this was July 1963. Beatlemania had begun by then. Now, they'd already had hits, and we knew them very well from the television by then. This was post-Hamburg days, before they went to America. But when they arrived at Northwich to crown the Rose Queen, they had to arrive in a van, and they had to pretend that the van was delivering food. And then they had to get out, and of course they were wearing suits. They got their equipment when they got there. So they got there, met the mayor, met the mayoress, crowned the queen, had the photographs taken. All the photographs taken are black and white. I'm going to put some on at the end. And so they had the photographs taken that day. And then later on, they were going to go to the Memorial Hall and do a concert. And what they realised was, between crowning the Rose Queen and wearing day suits, Paul and Ringo had left their evening jackets behind, and they'd left them in Liverpool. Now, Liverpool's about 20 miles away. It takes about an hour now or so on the motorways to get there. Probably took about the best part of 2 hours to get there and back. But they were taken back to Liverpool to get their stage jackets, and John and George stayed on in Northwich entertaining the Queens. And there are photographs of the two of them with the Rose Queens in the papers. Now, back then when they were on the television, we had Jukebox Jury, we had Hit and Miss, the Pop Parade, we had Top of the Pops, and of course the Beatles were seen in black and white. Well, likewise, the local newspapers were black and white as well. We only had black and white photography, and when we had the Carnival, we had to wait a week. Well, Carnival was on the Saturday. We had to wait until the Thursday until the Northwich Chronicle was printed, published and in the shops ready to be sold. It was probably the most sought after copy ever, because it was thought that everybody in Northwich was there that day to see some part of what was going on. And then the following day, the Northwich Chronicle came out. Now, although there are photographs in the Northwich Chronicle and the Northwich Guardian, the photographer isn't credited. And I have got a book that I bought off eBay, this one, and it's by a guy called Clive, sorry, put my glasses on for this. It's by a guy called Clive Nelson, and the photographs are in there. If you look on Pinterest, there are photographs in the public domain of them crowning the Queen, whose name was Catherine Millington. She's probably never forgotten it. And I said, well, hang on a minute, because my brother was the photographer for the Northwich Guardian. I've just spoken to him tonight, and I said, that wasn't you that took that photograph. I thought if he'd never shut up about it, surely. And I'd never heard of that. And he said, no, it wasn't me. He said, but the guy that mentored me at the Guardian and the Chronicle later on took the photograph. So one of the photographs was taken by Les Good, and the other photograph in the Chronicle was taken by a guy called Ken Miller. And I have heard the name Les Good from my brother over the years, but not Ken Miller. I don't know if either of them are still alive, but I think they'd be delighted to know that their photographs are still on the internet now. Of course, it was all pre-internet dates, wasn't it? So I thought that was really quite funny. They had to go all the way back to Liverpool to get their coats, get their jackets, so that they could perform that night. Now, they came back again in September, and after that, everything was haywire for the Beatles, wasn't it? So they didn't return again. I will do another session on what went on in the Memorial Hall over the years, because there were cracking bands that came. The Stones, the Who, the Kinks, the Small Faces, they all came. And interestingly, I've been checking that to see when Ringo played with Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, because in 1961, that group played at the Memorial Hall. So it might have been that Ringo, who was the oldest of them all, might have played at the Memorial Hall before they did. They didn't start till 62, 63. Anyway, I thought I'd share that with you. I have got some photographs of Northwich and the fiasco. I have to say that the falconry display was really, really nice to see. Unexpectedly. We didn't want to stay there, though, for the dog display, and we were getting quite hungry and thirsty by then, so we did pop round the stalls and decided not to pay £4.50 for a portion of chips. I think it was £6 something for a burger, £2.50 for a paper cup with a coffee in it. So we went into Northwich instead and sat and had a coffee out in one of the pavement cafes, which was nice. So I have got some photographs of Northwich today. I think I'm going to edit the beginning of this footage out, or I'm going to do it as part 1 and part 2. So part 2 might be the photographs of today, the video footage of today, and when the Beatles came to town. They got there before me. I was always a Paul McCartney fan when they were on Top of the Pops, and I remember them on Top of the Pops when I was young. I think one of my favourite songs he sang was P.S. I Love You, and I was hooked from them onwards. So from that day to this. So for now, a non-sewing Maggie this weekend will say bye for now. See you soon.